Well, good morning and welcome. Welcome to this celebration for the life of Alberta Stevens, also known as my mother and the garden guru of German Village. As my family and I talked about where to gather and celebrate my mom's life with family and friends, this was the place that seemed perfect. And what better way to honor her life than surrounded by those who loved her in a place where she lived out one of her greatest passions in life, bringing beauty to the world through gardening. The Huntington Gardens, as you know, were a place where she was able to share her talents with her community and cultivate many of her deepest friendships. She loved this park and how it was a gathering place for those in the village, and she would be happy that we're here today on this gorgeous, gorgeous morning. So before I begin the service, I would like to invite Chris Hume, the president of the German Village Society, to come forward and offer you a few words. So Chris, please come forward.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to German Village, to the family and friends of Alberta Bert Stevens. I think we can honestly say that this day was orchestrated by Bert. German Village is going to feel a little different without the presence of Bert. She was truly one of a kind. When Bert had you in her sights, you knew she wanted something. And yes, it was typically your checkbook. And the outcome of gaining entrance to that checkbook is surrounding us today with these beautiful gardens that she passionately watched over, or some will say lorded over. I would venture to say that everyone present here today has their own Bert story. One that stays with me is from some years ago during the planning process of House and Garden Tour. I don't remember the exact year, but I was still using a BlackBerry, so that will date it somewhat. Many of you know that Bert had inserted herself as a permanent member of the annual event committee and insisted she was the only person who could effectively vet any potential garden location. And mostly she was correct. But the reality we all knew is that she always wanted to be in the loop of every aspect of the tour details. But this particular year, we decided to feature both of our parks as official stops on the tour route. We were well into the final details of putting our program to bed for publishing and had an impending deadline to honor. Bert had insisted on writing a description of the Huntington Gardens and didn't want any portion of it to be altered, even though we had a writer who was overseeing all of our program copy for its consistency and content. She also wanted the actual denoted stop to say Huntington Gardens, not Schiller Park. This conversation was taking place via email as I was working full-time and was at a customer site, sitting in their parking lot, and included our executive director at the time. The discussions went on for over an hour and a half via my BlackBerry on topics as to Schiller versus Huntington Gardens, a fight that she did lose, to the voice of the description of the Huntington Gardens to be consistent with the writing of the other homes and gardens. On that, we ultimately compromised, but by the time I pulled out of that parking lot, my fingers were literally sore from the interactions of typing responses. Bert was nothing if not relentless. That relentlessness has served her well and German Village, and these gardens have and will continue to benefit from her passion and love for our community. Your physical presence may be gone, Bert, but your spirit will remain with us and remind us every day as we walk along these paths. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Well, we've gathered here today in this most special place to now lift up, remember, and celebrate the life of Alberta Stevens, born on November 16, 1938. And the baptismal promise of eternal life was granted to her on August 28, 2021. Again, thank you for being here. Your presence today is a tribute to my mom's life and an expression of your love for her and her families. A quick announcement. For those who would like to walk through her home gardens or her personal gardens, you're invited to stop by today between the hours of 2 and 4. Her family will be there to greet you, and we would love to see you. We now begin this service in the name of the one who wraps Bert in eternal love and light. Our call to worship is the 100th Psalm. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is God. It is God who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving, in his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless his name. Let us pray. O Lord Christ, good shepherd of the sheep, you seek the lost and guide us into your eternal fold. We give you thanks as we remember before you today our sister Bert. We thank you for giving her to us to know and to love as a companion in our pilgrimage on earth. Make us one with you, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. This is a service of celebration, and I would like to invite a few people to come forward and share their remembrances about my mom. And the first person is David Gaumer, her left-hand or right-hand person in the garden. So David, please come forward.
I remember back in 1992, I was at my house on Mohawk Street, and a knock was on the door. And I thought, oh my gosh, who wants what now? So I opened up the door, and there stood Bert. And I come outside, and she said, I'm Bert Stevens. I just wanted to come by and let you know how beautiful that garden is. I said, okay, thank you. She said, did you do this for a living? I said, no. She said, and of course, one thing that you should remember is there's no in Bert's dictionary. And she said, we just have this beautiful garden over at Schiller Park that we just started, and you'd be perfect to help with the garden. And I stood there, and she says, we'll see you Tuesday night, right? And I said, yeah, I'll be there. So here we are 30 years later, standing here wishing Bert well. And when my committee meets for the planning for next year for plants, I'm sure she's going to be looking over my shoulder and say, you sure that plant is right? You sure it's the right color, the right texture? And I'll just say, Bert, we got this. We're all going to be fine. And another thing that she really loved was the little fairy garden that we had over here to your left. But they have now moved into the Huntington Garden, and if you look over here at either corner, you'll see the new fairy gardens, and one of them has Bert's name in it. It's her fairy garden. So thank you.
And from one of her deadheaders, Missy O'Malley. You'll notice a lot of the deadheaders have pink flamingos on for Frederica back here.
Good morning. I am very proud to be a deadheader at the Huntington Garden. This is my 8th season. But I want to share a story about how I first met Bert. I was in the Master Gardener intern class back in 2014. And at the end of our classes, we would invite the Franklin County garden leaders to come in, talk about their gardens, explain them, answer questions, and more to entice people to come and work. So one afternoon, in walked Bert Stevens. She had her Grateful Deadheader shirt on, which was designed by German Village artist Jeff Stoller. And she had me there because I'm a Jerry Garcia fan. So she came and she talked about the Huntington Garden and how she combined the German and the American cultures in the gardens with the colors of the plants. And she said, on Tuesday nights, we go out to eat in our garden clothes, and a lot of the restaurants in the city, well, cha-ching, I'm a foodie too. So I decided to come to the garden that next Tuesday. When I came in, I introduced myself, and she said, come with me. and she took me to the head of the west bed right here. She said, "Do you see that plant?" "Yes, I do." "I want you to move that 1.5 inches forward." So I pulled out my soil knife because it has a ruler. So I measured 1.5 inches, I put in a stick, dug up the plant, moved it, planted it, and watered it, and she goes, "Okay, you can come back." Well, I came back a lot since it's my 8th season. She loved to go to garden centers, you all know that, because she was happiest among her plants, especially in the winter when we weren't growing much here. So I would go with her a lot. And she knew every owner of every garden, and that's how she got them ready when she made her big, pull to, "Could you give me this and this and this?" And they did. That was the beauty of it. So one day we were going to Groovy Plants, and my husband said, "I'd like to go with you. I haven't seen that place." So we went to Groovy Plants, we walked around, we enjoyed it, we bought 1 million plants, and Dave said, "Do you want to grab lunch?" And she said, "Are you paying?" And so she invited Dave every time we went out to a garden center. One Saturday, everybody was gone and I was going to drive her home. So we sat on her bench and we finished the rest of the donuts and we talked about our families. And we talked about all our families who were in heaven. And she said, "Someday when I get to heaven, I'm going to plant a garden and I'm going to wait for all of you to come up and help me." So I wish I was at the gates when she met St. Peter, because she handed him the garden plan, and she said, "American bed here, German bed here, and where will I put my flamingo?" So in my heart, I know that that garden is already planted, and I know she has recruited more deadheaders. But I just want to say, Bert, we miss you, we love you, and I know you're watching us today. And someday we'll be together, but until that day, please rest in peace and keep gardening. Thank you.
And now her grandson, Nathaniel, would like to say a few words.
I thought a lot about what I wanted to say today. My grandma's always been someone who provides a lot of stories, so it's more of an issue of editing than trying to find material. And over the years, as we've met new people, eventually the topic of my grandma always arises, and there are a few stories you have to throw out so people get an idea of her character, because it's just something to be wowed by. And so some of the stories I would tell my friends as they learned about her was, there was a time in middle school where I just learned to play the saxophone. So she took me to this concert downtown with these, really well-established saxophonists. We were in the second row, wonderful seats. They play this dazzling solo, and in a moment of silence, she says in her raspy, loud smoker's voice, "I guess people think this is good. I don't know why." And there was a time that the CEO of Victoria's Secret moved in across the alley from her. And on her first meeting of him, he had put out his trash cans wrong, somehow either the wrong day or in the wrong location. And so she harangued him in the conversation for a while. And then as she was walking away, he says, "Well, nice to meet you, Bert." She says, "Be nice to meet you once you figure out your trash cans." And there's this story of how we were walking over to some neighborhood block party, and she turns to me halfway there and says, "I'm really a very shy person." No sense of irony. It's truly how she viewed herself. And then there are the stories my wife liked to tell after my wife met her. When she first learned about my wife and saw some photos and learned she was a dancer, she said, "She's a dancer? She can't be a dancer. Her breasts are too big." And then the first time she met my wife, then girlfriend, she said, "All right, when am I getting some grandkids? I don't have that long. And then the night that I would propose to Alyssa, we had dinner there just hours before we would go to the Compass Zoo, and I would propose. And I stepped out after dinner to go to the bathroom, and she looks down at my wife's hand, and she says, "I don't see a ring. Must be tomorrow." Spoiled the whole thing. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so many grandma stories. And I was sitting on her porch with my brother a few nights ago, and he just said, "I don't know if I've ever known someone to say so many wildly inappropriate things as grandma." she may hold that award. And those stories, and the number of those stories, are just a product of who she was as a person. Right? She was honest. She was straightforward. She had this really strong sense of right and wrong, and she would let you know when you were wrong. She was herself in a way that very few people are themselves. She was just this mess of all of these strongly held contradictions that you just rarely see in one person. It was sort of like a natural wonder, like the Grand Canyon, right? You try to describe it to people, but they just don't get it until they've experienced it. But what I keep coming back to as I think of her and her memories is what a strong, positive force of will can do in the world. She believed in the German village community. She believed in the power of a garden to revitalize the human spirit. And she believed in the beauty of a world where we depend the most closely on our friends, and we do everything to give our friends what they need from us. I didn't really gain an appreciation until the last few years of how hard, how much of what she accomplished was. You sort of had this picture that these gardens and her garden and everything that she was involved with just sort of happened. And the opacity of that for me was just that she never talked about it. She never talked about her accomplishments. She never talked about her struggles, or how hard it was to do something, or how proud she was that she had accomplished something. She was incredibly humble, which is not a personality trait that you would normally see with her other personality traits. But it was there, and it was sincere. I remember a few years ago, I was in the area, and we had talked a week ago about me stopping by. And so I called her up to see if it was still okay for me to stop by and visit. And she picks up the phone, she sort of hems and haws, and she goes, I'm in a golf cart, and I'm wearing this crown, and it's a whole thing. I don't think I can. And that was the end of the call, and I was very, very confused. I talked to my dad later, and I found that she had been given this distinction of being queen for the day for the house and garden tour, which we were still trying to figure out all the details of, so maybe someone could fill us in on all of that. But that was something, those kinds of things she would never mention to us, right? We had to learn about her accomplishments and her accolades from other people, which is part of what makes today so special, and then talking to all of you so special. She once said in a tense moment that we didn't understand how people were in the village. Meaning that we didn't understand how far people went to help each other. And in that moment, that specific moment, I think we were right that she was maybe asking for a little bit too much. In another sense, I think that she was right. This community here and her contribution to it is so special and so unique and so rare in today's world. And I fear that as a society we're trending away from it. So as I think of her legacy and what I want to carry forward, and what I want to see my kids carry forward, is that dedication to a community, that selfless dedication. Only be concerned with how your efforts are contributing to the people around you and improving their lives. So, as I was working on this speech, this is where it ended. And it always felt unsatisfying, and I felt like I'd missed something, and I had no idea what that something was. And then it hit me last night before I went to bed that I left out talking about our personal relationship. Probably because that's the hardest thing to talk about at a time like this. But I think it's important that I try. So, I loved her, and I always knew that she loved me. I loved visiting her house as a child. I loved all the exciting adventures she took me on, even though she got lost in the car pretty much every time. I loved her long, rambling voicemail messages that I would I would put on her speakerphone if anyone else was in the room so they could just hear it. So I always knew it would be good for a laugh. I loved her reverence, her disregard for status and rank. If Obama had moved in across the street who she loved and he'd mess up his trash cans, he would have heard about it. I loved it. She believed in me even in times when I didn't have faith that I could pull my life together. I loved how quickly she worked to make my wife feel like a member of her family. And I loved how much she loved our grandkids and always wanted to be updated and see photos and give them everything that she could. And ultimately, I really loved her. And I'm very thankful to everyone who came out today to help us remember her. Thank you.
He's my son. So I intentionally put a buffer between him and me, and I'd like to invite Bill Curlis to come forward so I can recover from my son doing a wonderful job.
I appreciate the opportunity today to join with all of you to honor and celebrate the German village life of Alberta Stevens, my neighbor lady. And on her behalf, I do think I need to, those of you who are standing over here close to the gardens, let's not waste this good day. You could be deadheading and pulling weeds. I first met my neighbor lady in the summer of 1990 when I parked inappropriately, as it turned out, in front of my house. A tiny little lady with her companion, Annie. Some of you remember Annie. The only dog that had been trained to look both ways before crossing the street. Annie was a jewel. This tiny little lady came barging across the street to tell me, "You can't park there." It seemed that her new garage and she were having difficulties, and there was some way that she was careening right to left through most of the alley to turn into her garage, and my car was impeding that progress. It was also on that fateful day that I learned about the tree fund, and that you never had a conversation with Bert that didn't include a need for a check. Well before there was a Schiller Gardens, aka Huntington Gardens, there was and is, to this day, a tree fund to save the trees in Schiller Park. Sue Larson, Sandy Kite, and a few others, along with my neighbor lady, worked to mulch around and feed the trees in Schiller Park. And so it was on that day I wrote my first check to my neighbor lady. Some of you may not remember that before Bert became German Village renowned for simply saying, "I need a check," she sold things to raise money for the tree fund. I have a whole corner in my basement of garden gloves, clippers, trimmers, aprons, hats, and of course the German Village blankets. I still have 3 of them in my basement. You know, they make a good Christmas gift. For the next 31 years, that was my life with my neighbor lady in Macon Alley. Saving the trees was replaced by the Huntington Gardens, but I need a check remained on the list to the end. Yes, she was a relentless fundraiser for all things German Village, but behind all of that was a lady driven with a genuine concern and love for our village and its parks, and especially her friends, all of you. My neighbor lady and I were very good friends, and we often talked about the state of the world, politics, the state of German Village. That was really interesting. Rarely gardening, and then of course Buckeye football, and especially Buckeye basketball. She was a great basketball fan. And wouldn't she have loved the Buckeye game on Thursday night? I'm going to miss that. I already do. My last conversation with Bert was just 10 days ago, where we talked on a wide range of interests and topics, including getting a rhubarb pie from Smith Farms and a request for a copy of the German Village directory to call a few folks. She had a new project, and I need a check. I will take exception to a previous speaker because I am absolutely certain that when my neighbor lady gets to those proverbial pearly gates, her first words to St. Peter will be, "I need a check." My dear friend, my neighbor lady, Bert Stevens, you are missed.